Disclaimer: this is a fictional emotional story inspired by the powerful connection between humans and animals. While the characters and events are imaginary, the emotions they portray are deeply real. In the dusty corners of Arizona, far from bustling cities and highways, lies a fading village called Dust Rock. The village is nearly forgotten, its post office shut down, the school empty, and cell signals almost non-existent. Here, surrounded by dry hills and silence, lives a man named Thomas Rayner, a 58-year-old farmer weathered by grief and time. 10 years ago, Thomas lost his wife and young daughter in a tragic house fire. Since then, he has spoken little to anyone. His land is cracked and dry, but he tills it anyway. His clothes are always the same, denim overalls and a sun-worn hat. The only soul he really speaks to, is his donkey, Jasper. Jasper isn't just any donkey. He's old, slow, and gray with a jagged scar on his right ear from a fight with a wolf years ago. He's stubborn, quiet, and doesn't seem to care for anyone else. But to Thomas, Jasper is a companion, a listener, a reminder that life still responds even if silently. Each morning, Thomas brings out a tin bowl of oats and fills Jasper's bucket with water. As the donkey munches, Thomas sits on the porch, rocking back and forth in his creaky wooden chair. He often talks about the past, about dreams he had, and about the loneliness that follows him like a shadow. "You know, Jasper," he once whispered, "they all think I'm crazy talking to you like this, but you're the only one who stayed." Jasper, as if understanding, flicked his ears and nudged Thomas's hand gently. The townsfolk, what few remain, laugh behind Thomas's back. They call him Donkey Man. Some kids throw stones at Jasper when they think no one's watching. But Thomas never complains. He just keeps to himself, guarding the only relationship he has left. One day, a stranger came down the dirt road, a man in a suit with papers in his hand. He brought bad news. The land was being taken for a new highway. Thomas would be forced to leave in 2 weeks. Compensation was offered, but no one cared where he would go. Certainly not about Jasper. That night, Thomas sat beside Jasper in the barn. He didn't cry, he hadn't cried in years, but his eyes stayed wet as he stroked Jasper's back. "I don't know what to do now, buddy. I can't take you with me. Not where I'm going. The old donkey just lay beside him, resting his head on Thomas's knee. The barn was silent, except for the sound of breath, one heavy with sadness, the other steady with quiet loyalty. The bond between man and donkey, unspoken yet unbreakable, stood stronger than the winds that howled outside. And though neither knew it yet, their real journey had only just begun. 2 days after receiving the notice, Thomas made the hardest decision of his life. The money they offered wasn't enough to start over, but it would cover a few months of food and maybe a small apartment in the city. A city where animals like Jasper didn't belong. Thomas spent the morning packing what little he owned, his wife's photo, his daughter's burnt music box, and a few shirts. He didn't say a word to Jasper. He couldn't. Every time he looked at the donkey's eyes, those large, dark pools of loyalty, he felt something inside him crack. Later that afternoon, he walked Jasper to the riverbank at the edge of the property. It was their old fishing spot back when life made sense. There, under the shade of an old oak tree, he tied Jasper loosely to a post using a soft rope and draped a thick blanket over him. He placed a bowl of water beside him and gently patted his side. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I can't take you with me. You deserve better than being dragged into some concrete jungle," Thomas whispered, voice rough like gravel. "I left a note. Maybe someone kind will find you." Jasper didn't resist. He simply stared at Thomas, unmoving, unblinking, as though he understood. His ears flicked once, but he didn't bray, didn't tug the rope. That stillness was the hardest part. It felt like goodbye. Thomas left quickly, head down, boots scraping the dirt. He couldn't bear to look back. His pickup truck was already packed, engine sputtering like it always did. As he drove away from the land he'd tended for decades, past the old barn, the dried-out fields, and finally the curve that led out of the village. He whispered one last thing under his breath. "Goodbye, Jasper." But behind him, Jasper stood still for hours. The sun dipped and the air turned cold, but he didn't lie down. He stared toward the road, ears sharp and listening. He hadn't eaten, not even sipped water. He waited. Night came. Thunder rolled across the hills. The sky cracked open, spilling rain in sudden, violent gusts. The rope tugged, then snapped clean off the wooden post with a loud snap, perhaps loosened by time, or maybe by something else. Jasper shook off the blanket, his body soaked but determined. His legs wobbled at first. He hadn't walked far in months, but he pushed forward. Driven by instinct, by loyalty, by something deeper than language. His hooves hit the wet dirt, splashing through puddles as lightning flashed above. He didn't know roads or highways or directions. But he knew Thomas. And Jasper had already decided he would not be left behind. The storm raged through the night like a beast set free. Trees groaned under the weight of the wind, and thunder cracked across the hills like gunfire. But Jasper kept going. Step by step, his hooves pressed into the wet earth, sinking into the mud with each stride. His legs trembled from fatigue. He hadn't eaten, hadn't rested, but there was something stronger than hunger driving him forward, a memory. He remembered Thomas's voice, his rough hands gently brushing Jasper's fur. The quiet laughter they once shared when Thomas tripped over a bucket and blamed the donkey. The smell of old hay in the barn. The sound of a guitar playing a lullaby long forgotten. These memories weren't spoken. Jasper didn't know words. But in his heart, whatever a heart is for a donkey, he felt them. And now that bond burned like fire in the middle of the cold storm. The rain blurred his vision, but still he walked. He passed the old mill, crossed a half-broken fence, and reached the cracked asphalt road Thomas had driven off on. His hooves clicked awkwardly on the pavement, unused to the feel of it. A passing car honked loudly, splashing water, but Jasper didn't flinch. He was on a mission. Back in town, no one noticed he was gone until morning. The village sheriff found the empty rope and the soaked blanket by the riverbank and scratched his head. "Damn thing broke loose in the storm," he muttered, shaking his head. "He's probably halfway to Mexico by now." But Jasper wasn't lost. Somewhere deep in the hills, Thomas had pulled over the night before to sleep inside his truck. He couldn't afford a motel, and the cliffside road he found was quiet and empty. A risky place to rest, but it gave him peace. What Thomas didn't know, what no one could have known, was that just a few miles ahead, a landslide was brewing. Heavy rains were soaking the hills, loosening rock, and preparing to send part of the mountain crashing down. Jasper, soaked to the bone, limped onto the same road hours later. He was exhausted. The storm was fading now, but his energy was nearly gone. His fur was matted, and his steps were slow. But the scent, Thomas's scent, was faintly in the air. He paused and sniffed, took a few more steps. Sniffed again. He was getting close. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed in the distance. Jasper froze. A low rumble filled the air like distant thunder, only it didn't fade, it grew louder. Rocks began to tumble down the mountain. Far ahead, out of sight, Thomas sat inside the truck, unaware that death was sliding toward him. And Jasper? He started running. Pain or no pain. He ran. His old legs weren't fast, but they were faithful. Because no matter what, Jasper had made a promise he would find him. Thomas's truck sat quietly on the edge of Route 89, a narrow road that twisted along the side of a steep ravine. The storm had calmed, but a thick mist still hung in the air. It was early morning, just before dawn, and Thomas stirred from an uneasy sleep in the driver's seat. His back ached, and his legs were stiff. He rubbed his eyes and reached for the bottle of water by his side. That's when he heard it. A low, grinding sound. Like the groan of a heavy machine, but there were no machines nearby. Then came the crack. It was sudden and sharp. The kind of sound that pierces the soul because something about it feels unnatural. Thomas looked in his rearview mirror just in time to see it, a landslide. Boulders, trees, and wet earth came thundering down the mountain slope behind him. The road buckled. Before he could even reach for the keys in the ignition, something massive slammed into the back of his truck. Everything flipped. The world spun. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Then, darkness. When Thomas came to, he was upside down. The truck had rolled over the side of the road and landed halfway down the ravine. The windshield was shattered. The dashboard was crushed against his legs. He couldn't move. Pain pulsed through his body in waves. "Help," he whispered, but it came out like a sigh. His mouth was dry. His vision blurred. He tried to scream, but his voice barely carried over the sound of the distant rain and creaking metal. He was bleeding, he didn't know how badly, but it was bad. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed, "God, if you're still up there, please. I can't die like this. Not like this." He thought of his wife. His little girl. He thought of Jasper. The way he'd looked at him before Thomas left. Quiet. Loyal. Still. And in that moment, crushed, alone, broken, Thomas whispered one word, "Jasper." It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a command. It was a final thought. The last name on his lips as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Above, on the road, the landslide had made it nearly impossible for anyone to pass. Rescue teams would take days to reach this stretch of the highway. There was no signal, no traffic, no chance for survival. Unless somebody found him, somebody who didn't care about danger, somebody who remembered where he went, somebody with ears sharp enough to hear a whisper through the mist, somebody with a heart big enough to run through fire and flood. Somebody like Jasper. And at that very moment, about a mile up the road, the donkey was there. Standing on shaky legs, covered in mud, breathing heavy. He paused, ears twitching, as if he had heard something, a voice or maybe just a feeling. His eyes scanned the road ahead, and then he moved forward again, step by painful step. Because Jasper was close now, and he could feel it. The morning sun broke through the clouds like a shy visitor, casting light over the battered landscape. The storm had passed, but it left chaos in its wake. Rocks littered the roads. Trees lay uprooted, and the stretch of highway where Thomas had vanished was deadly quiet. Except for one sound, the soft, unsteady clop of hooves on wet asphalt. Jasper was near collapse. His legs ached, his lungs burned, and every step felt like dragging a boulder behind him. But something pulled him forward, an invisible thread tied from his heart to Thomas's. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't luck. It was something more, a bond that defied logic. At the edge of the ravine, Jasper paused. He sniffed the air, ears twitching. There, barely visible, was a twisted chunk of metal far below, a shape he somehow recognized. The truck. Thomas's truck. No one else was there. No sound. No movement. Just the wind rustling the grass. Then Jasper did something no one would believe unless they saw it. He stepped forward and down. Carefully, awkwardly, the donkey began to climb. Not a steep drop, but a dangerous slope. Slick with mud. Jagged with stone. One wrong step could have meant the end. But Jasper didn't hesitate. He slipped twice. Once nearly tumbling. But he dug his hooves in and brayed a loud, desperate cry that echoed across the hills. Inside the truck, Thomas stirred. The sound pulled him from the edge of unconsciousness. He blinked, barely able to turn his head. Through a shattered window, he saw a shape moving down the slope. At first, he thought he was hallucinating. Jasper, he whispered. Jasper finally reached the truck and pressed his face to the broken glass. He brayed again, louder this time, and stomped his hooves. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "You came. You actually came." But Jasper didn't stop there. He turned his head and brayed again, louder, facing the road above. Again and again, 3, 4, 5 times, his cries carried through the ravine like a siren. And someone heard. Miles down the road, a search and rescue worker named Elena was clearing debris with her crew when she paused. "You hear that?" she asked. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. "A donkey. In the middle of nowhere?" one of the men asked. She didn't answer. She just followed the sound. Within 30 minutes, they arrived at the edge of the ravine. There they saw the unbelievable, a donkey, battered and dirty, braying beside an overturned truck. They scrambled down and reached Thomas within minutes. He was alive, barely, but alive. "If it wasn't for him," one rescuer muttered, "we wouldn't have found you." Thomas tried to speak, but he could only reach out his hand toward Jasper. The donkey leaned in, gently pressing his nose against Thomas's palm. And in that moment, no words were needed. Because Jasper had done the impossible. He had saved his friend. By noon, the rescue team had pulled Thomas from the wreckage. His injuries were serious: 2 broken ribs, a fractured leg, and deep cuts on his forehead, but he was conscious, breathing, and miraculously alive. Jasper stood nearby the entire time, never straying more than a few feet from his side. Paramedics loaded Thomas onto a stretcher and into a waiting helicopter. As the rotor blades spun and the chopper began to rise, Thomas weakly lifted his head and pointed. "Take care of him," he croaked. Don't leave him behind." Elena, the search and rescue worker who had first heard Jasper's call, nodded firmly. "He's coming with us." News of what happened spread like wildfire. At first, it was just a local feel-good story. A donkey brays and leads rescuers to his injured owner. But by the next morning, national news outlets picked it up. "Loyal donkey saves man trapped in landslide. Hero donkey tracks down owner through storm and mud. You won't believe what this donkey just did." Photos of Jasper, mud-covered, eyes wide, standing proudly next to a stretcher, went viral. One clip of him nudging Thomas's hand in the hospital received over 10 million views in a single day. Thomas, heavily bandaged and on painkillers, chuckled weakly when a nurse showed him the headline. "I told y'all," he murmured, smiling through cracked lips. "That donkey's got more heart than half the people I've met." Back in Dust Rock, the villagers who used to call him Donkey Man suddenly saw things differently. The same kids who had once thrown stones at Jasper were now asking their parents if they could ride donkeys or if they could visit him. And Elena? She took charge of Jasper's care, bringing him hay, grooming his tangled fur, and making sure he had a warm stable next to the hospital facility. But the donkey? He didn't seem to care about fame or attention. Every day, he stood patiently outside the hospital window where Thomas rested. And every evening, Thomas would smile when he saw that familiar shape. A week later, Thomas was well enough to sit in a wheelchair. The nurses wheeled him out onto the grass, and Jasper was waiting there, ears perked, tail swaying. Their eyes met. Thomas reached out, and Jasper leaned forward, pressing his head gently into Thomas's chest. No camera could truly capture that moment, though dozens tried. It wasn't just reunion, it was understanding. A kind of love that didn't need words. Thomas looked at the reporters, the doctors, the strangers around him. "You all think it's a miracle," he said softly. "But this is just what loyalty looks like." Then, turning back to Jasper, his voice trembled. "And I promise you, old friend, this time, I'm never leaving you behind." Thomas had recovered enough to walk with a cane. His leg, though still weak, had healed better than doctors expected. They called it a miracle. He called it motivation. Every day, Jasper stood outside the rehab facility waiting for him, and that kind of loyalty made a man heal faster than medicine ever could. The hospital, overwhelmed with public attention, had set up a small fenced area for Jasper in the back garden. Kids came to visit. Local schools arranged trips. The hero donkey of Dust Rock had become a symbol of love, loyalty, and impossible odds. Offers poured in from around the country. Animal sanctuaries wanted to adopt Jasper. Talk shows wanted to feature them both. A tech company even offered to sponsor a documentary. But Thomas politely turned most of them down. Jasper doesn't need to be anyone's mascot, he said. He just wants to go home. And so, when the doctor gave him the green light to leave, Thomas packed his things, this time with Jasper at his side. Returning to Dust Rock wasn't easy. His land had been sold. The barn was gone. But something incredible had happened in his absence. Strangers had started a GoFundMe for him and the donkey. The caption read, "Let's give Thomas and Jasper the farm they deserve." They raised $118,000 in 2 weeks. With that money, Thomas bought a small plot on the edge of town, a flat patch of grassland with a creek and a new barn being built by volunteers. The moment Jasper stepped onto the land, he brayed so loud the neighbors heard him half a mile away. It wasn't the same old farm, but it was home. One evening, Thomas sat on the porch, a mug of tea in his hand and a blanket draped over his shoulders. Jasper lay nearby in the straw, eyes half closed as the sun set behind the hills. "I should have never left you," Thomas said quietly. "But you came for me. You didn't forget." Jasper flicked his ears, but didn't move. He didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Thomas smiled, his eyes misty. "You know, I used to think I was done. That life had nothing left for me." He looked down at the mug in his hand. "But you showed me otherwise." Behind them, a new wooden sign had been nailed to the barn entrance. Jasper's Promise Farm. Beneath it, "Where loyalty leads home." By now, reporters had moved on to newer stories. The world spins fast. But in this little corner of the country, on a patch of green under a wide sky, a man and his donkey lived quietly. No drama, no tragedy. Just two souls, scarred, stubborn, and still walking forward. Together. Seasons came and went, painting the hills around Jasper's Promise Farm in gold, green, and white. Life slowed down for Thomas and Jasper, but it never stopped. The farm flourished not in crops or livestock, but in something more meaningful: stories, laughter, and healing. Veterans with PTSD visited to sit quietly beside Jasper. Troubled teens volunteered to help feed him, comb his fur, and listen to Thomas's tales. Widows, wanderers, and the broken-hearted came too, drawn by the soft magic of a place built on survival, second chances, and a donkey who once did the impossible. Thomas never stopped telling the story, not because he wanted attention, but because people needed to hear it. They needed to believe that even in the darkest hours, something or someone might come for them. That loyalty still existed. That miracles didn't always wear wings sometimes, they wore hooves and fur. On a quiet autumn morning, Thomas woke to find Jasper lying still under the oak tree behind the barn. His breathing was shallow. His eyes blinked slowly. He was old now, no one knew his exact age, but the years had finally caught up to him. Thomas knelt beside him. No panic. No fear. Just gratitude. "Hey there, boy," he whispered, stroking Jasper's ear. "You held on longer than anyone expected." Jasper let out a soft, raspy bray. His eyes never left Thomas's. "You remember that storm?" Thomas chuckled, voice cracking. "When everyone gave up on me, but you didn't?" A long silence. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered, tears slipping down his face. "But I'll never forget you." And as the morning sun warmed the dew-covered grass, Jasper closed his eyes for the last time, safe, loved, and home. The entire town came to his burial. They laid him beneath the oak, marked by a stone etched with the words, "Jasper, he found the way. Forever loyal. Forever loved." Children brought flowers. Strangers lit candles. And Thomas stood tall, his cane in hand, heart full. "I thought he saved just me," he said, voice carrying over the small crowd. "But looking at all of you, I think he saved more than that." He reminded us what we forgot. Years later, a book would be written about Jasper. It would be titled exactly like the headline that first made him famous, "You won't believe what this donkey just did." It would become a bestseller. A children's movie would follow. And in schools across the country, teachers would read aloud the tale of a donkey who crossed rivers, survived a storm, and found his way back to the only person who ever truly saw him. But long after the cameras faded and the news moved on, in a quiet corner of the world, there would still be a farm. And there, under the wide open sky, children would run barefoot through the grass, some laughing, some healing, all carrying pieces of the story. The story of Jasper, the donkey who believed.